We are back for another tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders. This is the Limitless Leadership Lounge. I'm John Gehring, today joined by Coach Jim Johnson and a special guest that Coach has brought on. We do want to remind you, though, before we dive into the episode, if this is your first time here, all you got to do is sit back and listen and enjoy and get what you can from this episode. If you've been listening for a while, though, we'd really appreciate your feedback up on our podcast platforms or wherever you're listening, whether that be Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of the other many platforms we are on. We would appreciate your feedback with a review up there. It helps us reach more listeners like yourself, young and emerging leaders. And it also gives us some good feedback on what types of topics to incorporate in future episodes. So without any further ado, let's dive into this episode. Coach Jim Johnson, go ahead and introduce our guest.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to introduce Kimberly Gawne. Kimberly and I have spoke a couple times, and she's doing some really neat things in the world in the educational uh, factor. So let me introduce you by saying Kimberly Gawne is the visionary founder behind Star Students, an educational organization dedicated to shaping the bright minds of tomorrow. With a deep passion for fostering learning, Kimberly has become a prominent figure in the field of education, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of countless students. Born and raised in a small town, Kimberly's early years were shaped by her curiosity and hunger for knowledge that set her apart. Recognizing the transformative power of education, she embarked on a path of academic excellence, earning a bachelor's degree in education from a prestigious university. Through STARS students, Kimberly has spearheaded a range of initiatives that goes beyond traditional teaching methods. With a keen eye for innovation, she has curated a team of passionate educators who employ cutting-edge strategies to engage students in immersive and interactive learning experiences. Leveraging technology, creating creative teaching techniques, and a focus on individual attention, Kimberly and her team have redefined what it means to learn and excel. Outside of her professional endeavors, Kimberly is an avid reader, constantly seeking new insights to fuel her passion for lifelong learning. She also enjoys volunteering at local youth centers where she mentors young students and encourages them to pursue their dreams. And since I have a speech called Dreams Really Do Come True, I can really connect with that. So, Kimberly, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We're looking forward to having you on the program.
Thank you for having me. I was going to say that's quite the introduction. Thank you. I appreciate you guys taking the time to be here and to chat with me today.
Our pleasure. So I'm going to dive right in because we've had a chance to chat a few times. Tell us the story behind START Students and how you're making a difference in the education world.
Of course. Okay. Well, that's kind of two-pronged. The story behind Star Students, to be quite honest with you, was something that started that it was not intended for me to start Star Students, to have Star Students. I actually graduated Teachers College at the height of what was going on in 2020, in April of 2020. So that was something that really opened my eyes, per se, to what was going on in the educational world. And while it certainly was different for people who have been in the education world for quite some time, say veteran teachers who have been in the education system for 10 to 20 years. As a new teacher, that was not an environment that I wanted to go into any longer. That wasn't somewhere where I felt I would really be able to fulfill my passions and really make the most difference, to be quite honest with you. A lot of the administration, a lot of the red tape, so to speak, and a lot of the differences in things that had been happening in the political side of things or on the political side of things, they were just not things I was willing to entertain in my career. And so I made the decision it kind of just happened where I went into tutoring because what else do you do when you've trained your entire life to be a teacher and you've gone through all of this education? And then very quickly that turned into tutoring, turned into Star Students, and Star Students turned into other extracurricular and I would say alternative education options simply because of the branding and the messaging that I was putting out there at the time. And I'm not sorry for that whatsoever. It's been one of the best decisions business-wise and just personal life-wise that I could have made for myself. So that's a little bit about Star Students in terms of how we kind of came to be and got started. And then you had asked, I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Well, how is your approach to education unique? How are you trying to impact with your students that maybe
Yes.
out of the norm?
Yes.
So,
Gotcha. Okay. So that's one thing that I mean, I could spend forever talking about methodologies and pedagogy and all that stuff. But to be very simple, to be very concise, students and children and people, just in general, will learn when they are engaged. They will learn when they are interested. They will learn when they have something that they're excited about, when they're invested in something, right? Particularly for children, that is very prominent, that is very evident. For adults, it's a little bit different. You would hope that adults have the discipline and the perseverance to be able to say to themselves, well, even if I don't want to do this, I'm going to. For children, you have to inspire them to learn. You have to help them. You have to guide them in that process. And so a lot of what we do at Star Students is inquiry based and is I won't say passion based, but it is student led. So our job as educators, both myself and my teachers, our job as educators is to pay attention to parents, of course, and to pay attention to the students in terms of what their interests are, in terms of what their goals are, in terms of what their concerns are. We will then take the curriculum, which I'll specify is the North American, so Canadian and USA. We will take the curriculum that's given out by the appropriate governing bodies, I will say, and we will take the academic standpoints of that and apply those to what the child wants to learn. So instead of what public school and to an extent most private schools will do, where they will mold the curriculum, they will mold the child to the curriculum, we do the opposite. We mold the curriculum to the child. And so that's where the idea, that's where the word inquiry-based comes from, and that's where the word student-led comes from. And so that's where our pedagogy, that's the heart of our pedagogy and the heart of our methodology in terms of teaching.
Wow. And we have a lot of educators in our audience who I'm sure everyone would agree that we want more individualized approach to education and we want smaller class sizes and all these things that that educators will argue for to be more effective. But you're really taking this by flipping it on its head and taking an opposite approach. You're teaching children how to think, not what to think. Could you talk a little bit about what that means to you? The whole idea of teaching someone how to think versus just fitting them into the curriculum, like you just stated?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of teaching children how to think and not what to think, I will agree that I speak with a lot of educators who at first kind of have their backs up a little bit because as someone who's an alternative educator who works outside of the system, the idea is automatically before they speak to me, like, oh, like this is the antithesis of what is someone that I want, right? You're taking kids away from public school kind of idea. And then they talk to me and they find out, well, that's not really true. Like education is something that is meant to be personalized. It's meant to, and most educators will agree with me on that. Education is something that's meant to be personalized. It's meant to be an experience. And it's meant to be something that is lived, not just practiced. And unfortunately, the public school system, through no fault of the teachers themselves, you understand, the public school system does not allow for that sort of freedom and does not allow for that sort of flexibility for some of those reasons you just mentioned. So that there's too many kids in a class, right? There's too many check boxes that you've got to check for each kid to be able to get that individualized attention, right? Unfortunately, and that's not the fault of the teachers. That's just kind of the way it is. In terms of our slogan and teaching children how to think, not what to think, I, as well as my teachers, we're very big believers in allowing children to be able to develop their own opinions on things obviously you have to be able to back those things up with facts and evidence, and that is the skill of argument and the skill of debate and the skill of reasoning. But something that I really stand against, both as an individual and as a business, and I'd say my teachers are the same way, is the idea of conformity and just going along with the main idea simply because it is the main idea, right? When you are confronted with something, whatever that may be, if it's a situation, if it's a person, if it's a circumstance, whatever it may be, if you're not able to logically and critically think through what may be the facts of the situation as opposed to some of the different perspectives of the situation and take those things into account, I think that's where a lot of the challenges come in, with conformity as a concept, right? And as something that is practiced in daily society. So we really encourage children to think outside the box. We encourage children to be able to develop their own opinions. We encourage children to be able to stand firm on what they believe, as long as they are, of course, respectful to other people. That's another thing that we really emphasize, right? Just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean that they're a horrible person. It just means that you don't agree with them on certain subjects. And how do you have that sort of critical thinking discourse without being disrespectful, right? So that's something that we practice, particularly with our older students, right? That's why I mentioned debate as one of the things that we like to be able to not enforce, but offer, right, as a subject.
Mm.
So one of the key areas that we always talk about, because our focus is help young and emerging leaders on this, is the famous growth mindset that Carol Dweck made famous in her book. Is that, so how do we foster a culture for both parents, educators, in helping children adopt this growth mindset?
That's a really good question. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I know that on the podcast here, you guys talk. I'm not the only person to talk about that. I'm sure is a growth mindset, because a growth mindset is really something that's necessary for life and for just in general for being able to manage things appropriately, I think. In terms of parents and or educators encouraging a growth mindset, I think a lot of that comes with, and I hate to use this word because it is so overused, but for lack of a better word, is resilience. There's a lot of people who do not have the resilience or the persistence or the determination or the willpower, whatever you want to call it, to get back up and keep going, right? There's all of these corny kind of sayings of, life's not about what happens to you, it's 90% how you react to it, right? Or it's not about how many times you can get hit, but how many times you can get back up and keep going, right? And while people might say that those things are a little bit corny, they might say that they're a little bit, out there, they don't really look at like both sides of the coin. I would say that really, those sorts of sayings, those sorts of quotes, or that sort of mindset is really important to a mindset of resilience and a mindset of persistence, which I think is one of the cornerstones of a growth mindset in particular, right? One of the key factors of a growth mindset is your persistence and how often you can keep going. I mean, logically, of course, taking steps forward means that you have to think about the complexities of taking those steps forward. You don't just want to be a bull in a china shop, so to speak, right? You have to have some sort of logical movement and logical pattern, to your movements. But I think people underestimate the ability of a lot of people and the importance of the ability of a lot of people to get back up and keep going, right? That I would say is one of the really, really important cornerstones of a growth mindset. And then the other one, I would say, I talked about this kind of already, would be the idea of being able to not get along with other people, but being able to engage with other people in a respectful manner, right? Because if you can't do that, you're going nowhere in life. Because I don't care how out there you want to be, unless you're going to run away and live in the woods and not talk to anybody for the rest of your life and be like someone who lives off grid, which I've done that. It was fantastic, but I still had to talk to people. You still had a community, right? Like of people that were there. Even if you want to, run away from the world and be sort of like a hermit, at some point in your life, you have to be able to, like, you're going to have to deal with people. And so learning that skill of being able to talk to other people that you may not agree with about really important issues is another thing that is super important for growth mindset, because how else are you going to keep your mind open to new things? It doesn't mean you have to accept those things as part of who you are, but it means that you have to be willing and able to intake that information and then respond back, right? In a respectful manner. That's a growth mindset. And that's a really important factor, I think, in a growth mindset, especially with the young people today, especially with the young people today.
Definitely, because our young people today are growing up in this world where we are lacking respect in a lot of ways, and we're seeing this people communicating without respect and having these preconceived notions and opinions that they aren't able to communicate without offending someone else while doing it. So, could you talk
Right.
about a little bit about that battle that kind of goes on where you have students growing up in this environment, being surrounded by it constantly, yet you're going against the current in their life, so to speak. How
Mhm.
does that work? And well, does it work?
I think it does. Something that we really like to stress with our older students in particular, again, there has to be a certain mental maturity level that's there, which is why the parents, like I'm a huge proponent of this, a huge advocate for parental involvement, right? Because as an educator, like we can educate your children, we can, like it doesn't matter where you choose to educate your child or how you choose to educate. As an educator, I will tell you, we can do everything that we can do. If it doesn't come from the household as well, it's really not going to go anywhere, right? And so fostering that idea of, or fostering that skill of respectful discourse, I think, is really important. And one thing that we like to stress with our students is not surrounding yourself with an echo chamber. And now for the audience who may not be familiar with the idea of an echo chamber, in short, it is just the concept of only surrounding yourself with people who agree with you, and only surrounding yourself with people who will always make you quote unquote feel good because they agree with you. That I think is a really, really dangerous thing to foster in children, because then as adults, when you get into that sort of idea, right, you have, as adults, we don't really necessarily make friends quite as easily. You're kind of
Right.
quote unquote set in your ways, so to speak, right? If you don't make it a practice from young to foster this part of what is a growth mindset of talking to other people who you may not agree with, of respectful discourse with others who you may not agree with, then as an adult, you unfortunately, the chances of you becoming someone who is less, I don't want to say accepting, but someone who's less tolerant of those whose opinions may be different than yours, that's a much higher chance of doing that if you haven't been healthfully or in a healthy manner exposed to, not influenced by, but exposed to other people with different perspectives than you, right?
Yeah,
um yeah.
I was gonna also ask a quick follow-up too about,
Mhm.
how listening skills,
Yes.
are involved in this as well, because that's certainly a relationship, and is there something like a listening skill practice that you encourage educators to do with their students, especially those older ones that you've referenced?
For sure, for sure. Not to give away the entire gift box here, but one thing that I have found very helpful to put into practice with students that we teach, and with educators, and even with people that I talk to, people often don't feel respected, and they often don't feel heard, like genuinely heard. So you mentioned listening just now, and I'm really glad that you did, because there's a difference between listening and active listening, right? When you're having a conversation that may be an uncomfortable conversation with someone, whoever that may be, whether it's a stranger on the internet, or whether it's your parent, or whether it's a friend that you've had for X amount of years, or a friend that you've just met, whoever it may be. One skill that I have found very helpful in my experience when talking to anyone about anything, you let them express themselves, and then you repeat back to them, I mean, in a different way, what they've just said. There's something that is so empowering about, and empowering and reassuring almost, in hearing someone say your same words back to you, or say similar things as to what you just said, right? Because that makes you feel validated. It makes you feel heard. And by no means am I saying that that's the most important thing here is feelings, but the idea of respectful discourse is being able to acknowledge that you heard the other person, right? It's especially if you don't agree. That's really important. So when someone says something to you that you initially may not agree with, I know for myself, this is something that I have put into practice, like I mentioned. When someone says something to me that I initially may not agree with, I will sit there and absorb it for a quick second, right? The processing tends to get a little bit faster with practice. And I'll say, okay, so what I just heard you say was, da, 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 da. Am I correct with that? Yes. Okay. I can agree with some aspect of what you're saying. That would be this, and here's why. I'm curious, right? Not I disagree with, because when people hear I disagree, they automatically get their defenses up, right? And so instead of straight out saying I disagree, I'm curious about this, and I'm not quite sure I follow you. Could you expand a little bit more on that? Because when you come from a place of curiosity, rather than automatically negating the person, it opens up that respectful sort of discourse, right? And again, none of this means that I have to, at the end of the discussion, agree with what that person is saying. That's not what that means at all, right? But it then opens up a respectful discussion of, can you explain more to me about that? Right? Rather than I disagree with you and you're all sorts of nasty names. I'm not trying to get you guys flagged on your podcast, right? But I'm sure you've seen online discourses where people are not respectful, right? And what does that solve? Like, what does that do for anybody, for either side? Nothing.
Well said. I really enjoyed that. Well, going back, two words that you brought up that I think are so essential to be an effective leader is perseverance or resilience. And saying that, I'd like you to inspire our audience, because there's a lot of leaders that listen to us that are thinking about doing their own venture, an entrepreneur like you are, where you started Star Students. Tell us a story about how you overcame a challenge in getting Star Students going and keeping it going.
Oh my goodness. Okay, like in terms of you, okay, so story first.
Yes, tell us the story of your journey of how you overcame a real challenge.
All right.
Getting Star Students.
All right. If that's the case, I am 100% at 100% going to say it's teamwork. And I will say that, so when I first started Star Students, it was not something that I intended on growing to the level where it is now. Again, I don't regret that. It's been one of the best decisions ever because I can make so much more of an impact. But the reason that like it's not even about me or the business making more of an impact. It's very simply being able to help more parents and being able to help more kids. And I realize that might sound really cheesy, but that was the essence of when I realized that, like, I can't do this on my own. There is no way I could say, listen, I went to school to be a teacher because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to teach. I've realized very quickly that I could sit there, especially with personalized education, where you have small classes of, because we only run small classes of 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 kids if they're in high school. And I could sit there and I could teach for 24 hours a day. And I still wouldn't have enough time to like teach all the kids, to help all the kids. there's not enough of me to like, there's only one of me. Some people maybe wish that there was two, or maybe that there was none, but there's only one of me, right? And I can only be in so many places at once. And so this was that, honestly, that was a really big, it was a mind screw to get around, because myself in my own life, I'm very, very independently driven, right? I always have to do things on my own. It's my job to take care of my own self. It's my job to take care of my own business just in life, right? Like I've always been that way, because I've just had a very innate sense of like responsibility, right? Of personal accountability. And so for me, one of the hardest lessons to learn in business, and now it's coming back in life, is that I cannot do it by myself. Sometimes you got to take a step back and you got to say, okay, is this realistic? And I could have, if I wanted to, kept teaching for, it would have been 16 to 17 hours a day at that point, plus everything else, right? But how is that realistic? Is that something that is really going to be sustainable in the long term, right? And so I made the decision. I actually I got myself a business coach, an amazing one. Got myself a business coach, and one of his first things that he said to me was, "You need a team. You need to hire a team." I was very averse to that. I'm telling you both, I was very averse to that. I was like, no, because nobody's going to be able to do it the way that it needs to be done. Nobody's going to be able to do things the way that it has to be done. But so do you know what we did? We came up with a very rigorous hiring process, which he helped implement, helped with the hiring process, all that stuff. And you know what? I now have an amazing team of licensed teachers that I do not have to micromanage, that I do not have to worry about. I don't have to check up on them every day. Not at all. Nothing. And that was what I wanted, because I said, if I am going to hire a team, it's going to be a team in the true sense that we're a team, and I have people that I know are responsible, that I don't have to worry about whether they're doing their jobs properly or not. Right.
Hey, I gotta have a follow-up on that, Kimberly, because obviously I coached teams for a long time, so I got to choose people to be on my team, and we had four keys or characteristics we looked for the people on our team. I'm curious, what was your characteristics or keys in looking to bring in the right people for your team?
Valid question. Valid question. First and foremost was the credentials, because as an alternative education business, obviously I respect the fact that, you know, people have different forms of education, etc. But if we as a business, if Star Students as a business is offering not only equivalent, not even equivalent, but superior education to the public, and in some senses the private schooling system, then I have to make sure that the people that we have that are working with Star Students are of the appropriate credentials, right? I have to make sure that that's the case, because I can't have someone teaching high school biology who doesn't have the credentials to do so, right? Yeah, so credentials was one thing that was very important to me. In terms of the other key characteristics, I was definitely looking at personality, because I said, if I'm gonna have a team, I want people who are here for the long term, right? And that takes a certain personality to be with a business and take a business in terms of, they see the potential, they see the value, but they genuinely want to be there, right? And they have to be able to actually teach, right? And want to teach. So I was looking for the credentials, I was looking for the personality, and then the last pillar, I suppose, in the triangle would have been the values, right? When you have a motto, and I'm going to speak plainly here, when you have a motto like progress without politics, and your slogan is teaching children how to think, not what to think, and you have parents that are coming to you for alternative education, you have to make sure that all of the teachers are on the same page in that, right? I did not want a case where one of my teachers was going to overstep what would be considered a parental boundary and what would be considered a parental conversation, perhaps. I'd like to say that there's certain things that are dinner table conversations that don't belong in the classroom. And so I had to make sure that all my teachers were on the same page in that sense. So in terms of the values of family and the values of education, that was the third thing that I was looking for. I will say that I have not had a super high I've not had a super high turnover rate. Everybody who has come to work with STAR students has stayed with STAR students, and is doing very well. They all like being here. I don't really have any complaints. We have our, our weekly, monthly check-ins and meetings, and they're always in my inbox for whatever support for kids or whatever, because these are teachers at heart, right? These are good teachers at heart. Right. And there's lots of good teachers out there. I just happen to find really good ones that were able to work with everything else too. Right. So yeah, those would be the three things. Those would be the three things: the credentials, the personality, and the values.
And it's really interesting too that you mentioned your very low turnover rate or non-existent turnover rate at
Yeah.
STAR students, which is something that a lot of business owners are struggling with these days with the Great Resignation, quiet quitting. We've heard
Yeah.
all of these terms. How are you able at STAR students to keep your staff so engaged and satisfied with what they do that you literally have no turnover?
It's funny you should ask that, because in the last sort of like one-on-one meetings that we had, that I had with the teachers that we employ here at STAR students, I asked them, I said, is there anything that you need from me? One thing that I told myself, I said, if I'm going to run this business and I'm going to open this business and I'm going to hire people, like when it was a decision that I needed to hire people, there are certain things I'm not going to do. I'm not going to make my people feel like they're replaceable. I won't make them feel like they're just numbers, because I know exactly what that's like from my own experience within the teaching world, and just within like the working world, right? Before I got to the point of graduating teachers college, when people feel like they're replaceable, and the fact of the matter is, realistically, everyone is replaceable. But when people feel like they're replaceable, and when people are made to feel like they're replaceable, that's when I think the problems start. Another thing this was something I noticed in teachers college, teachers are not supported in the way that they need to be. Like the teachers, the people themselves who are doing the teaching in the classroom are not supported in the way that they need to be. I said, that will not be a thing at STAR students. I will make sure that I have people. I will make sure that I have resources. I will make sure that I have a network to be able to support these teachers. I may not be able to answer all of their questions or help them with every little thing, but they know that they can come to me if they need something, and I will, if not me solve the problem directly, have someone who can help them solve that problem, whether that's personal or professional, right? Now, I also have a team of I have a team of 6, right? So it's not like I have thousands of teachers to manage here. I have 6 teachers plus myself, right? And I mean, we are growing, but as of this point, I am able to provide that sort of support. And growing, like in the future, I would like to be able to maintain that sort of support, because when your teachers feel supported, and I mean, this goes for any business really, when your people feel supported, they will serve your clients in the best way that they can. And that's just going to turn around on you and be a smart business decision, right? So it starts with supporting, especially for small businesses that aren't like a massive franchise like McDonald's or Arby's or some sort of retail company or whatever, right? What it starts with the people that work with you or that work for you, right? Because that when they're taken care of, take care of them, because then they'll take care of you.
Good point.
That
So-
would be my saying on that one.
Yeah. So as you talked about growth mindset, and we're getting close to the end. I'm just curious, I know you said you're an avid reader. If you were to recommend two or three books for young and emerging leaders, what would those be?
Oh, I have read so many good books lately. I have read so many good books lately. Um, for young and emerging leaders, I would say that the two most important ones. So one of the ones that I think is really important, in terms of the uh, emotional sort of self-awareness that I was talking about earlier, right? The idea of tolerating those respectfully, who may not always be in your same space, your same head space or your same mindset, would be Into the Wilderness by Brene Brown. I thought that was I actually recently read that, maybe 3 months ago. Read that one and it stuck with me. Now, again, I don't agree with everything in there, but there were some really good points that I was like, you know what, that's powerful, that's poignant, and that's a good thing to hang on to just in life. That would be one I would say is a very good one. The other recommendation I would have, that I'm not reading it at the moment, but I'm listening to it on Audible, is the $100 Million Leads,
Hmm.
or $100 Million. I think it's $100 Million Leads,
Yeah.
by Alex Hormozy.
Yep.
Yeah, both of you recognize that title.
Just read it.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good book. Very good book. He's got some really good points in there. I'm only on about chapter 2, but I'm recommending that one because it's a really good one so far. Usually if it's on Audible, I can make it through about one chapter and then I'm like, not sure about this. But this one, I made it to chapter 2 so far. I find it really good. So highly recommend. Thus far, my opinion might change, but doesn't seem like it.
And
And the
Brene
fact
Brown,
that you two know about it seems
yeah,
like
we,
it's a
we
good
both
book.
read it, so we're right up our alley. I've read some of Brene Brown. I'm just curious with the book you just recommended,
Mhm.
what would be one point you would share with our audience that you thought was really beneficial from the book?
Um, oh, just one.
Yeah.
Just one. Listen, I'm an English and a history teacher. You can't ask me for just one. Um, I would say, if I had to choose just one, the point that I really took away from that book was the idea that you are who you are, and there's no place there's no idea of home like the four walls that are around you.
Hmm.
Home is right here where you are. And that for me was really powerful, especially because we have so many youth these days, and I mean adults too, let's be honest, going through what seems to be an identity crisis and a lack of self, right? That to me was really powerful. That home is not the idea of four walls or a certain building. It's you, and you belong right here, right now. The idea of being in the present and the idea of being present with yourself, even through the discomfort of what might seem to be uncomfortable. It's the wilderness. It's why the book is called Into the Wilderness. It's the wilderness. It's unknown. It's savage, but it's you, and that's okay. The acceptance of that, of this is me and this is who I am. That was really powerful for me. That was, I think, probably one of the more important points.
Very good. Now, finally, Kimberly, as we wrap up here, I know there's parents potentially listening who are thinking that they love this idea of alternative education. They love what you're saying here, and you can learn more about STAR Students, by the way, at starstudents.co. But what should they do? What are their next steps? Their children are becoming school age, and they really like this idea of alternative education, but they don't know what steps to take. Could you just give them some advice on what to do?
Sure, yeah. I would say the first step, if your kids, if your kids are just coming of school age, first step, and I know for myself, one thing that I always advise, for any parent that I talk to, is to be able to do your research. Do your research, because you have to decide, you as the parent, are the primary educator of your child. You are the first educational force in their life. even if they're just going off to school, you're the one who's teaching them how to tie their shoes, right? You're the one who's teaching them how to dress themselves in the morning, how to hold the spoon properly. These sound like such simple things, but like, you're the parent, you're the first primary educational force. That responsibility to make sure that they have the best educational experience possible that is suited to them and to their learning style, you as the parent know what's best.
Yep.
You as a parent know what's best. And so that would be my first, that's always my first and foremost step for parents, is to do your research. The answer is different for a lot of people. For some kids, you know, public school is a great first answer for the first couple years, right? For some, it's completely different. It's to homeschool, it's to keep them out of the system. For some, it's to have them in a forest school. For some, it's to have them in a pod. Like, there's so many other options out there that people, parents, educators, that people just don't even know about, right? You don't have to send your child to public school. I promise you, you don't have to send your child to public school. There's so many other options. Do your research is my first step. And from there, you can make an educated decision, as long as, this leads to step 2, you have a community of experts and or guidance professionals around you, right? You have to talk to people to be able to hear other experiences. This is where that whole idea of growth mindset and respectful discourse comes in. Talk to people, because other people have had other perspectives and other experiences that you're going to want to know about, especially when it comes to the education of your child or children.
If you're a parent and you certainly aren't super satisfied with the direction that our world is heading in, especially when it comes to the way we discourse with one another, I think Star Students is definitely something you should check out and learn more. And Kimberly, I know we gave the website, that'll be down in the show notes as well, but is there an opportunity for parents as well to reach out to you to get more information about Star Students and help them make a decision for their next steps?
Yeah, actually, so I should say, yes, the website would definitely be like the primary spot to like find everything. All the social links are up there. Everything is there for you. In terms of like, yeah, social media, etc. Emails also on there. I'm very reachable through email, through phone. We are actually over the next month. So it's March, I think March 5th or 6th right now. So over the next month, March through to April, the beginning of April, we're offering free consultations for parents. And the tagline on that, a conversation about your child's education should not cost you anything.
Mm.
So that is my offer to parents. A conversation about your child's education is not going to cost you anything.
And you can grab one of those consultations up at starstudents.co. And that is great, Kimberly, that you're doing that, because that shouldn't be a barrier for any parent who's looking to just learn more and decide, make a wise decision that's best for their children. So, Kimberly, thank you so much for your time today. We love what you're doing, and we're looking forward to continue following your work at Star Students and seeing where it leads.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me. I loved the conversation. Thank you so much for like your interest and all your questions and everything else.
Thanks, Kimberly. It was a pleasure.